All right, this is Numbers 12 in the Prager Rational Bible. Let's begin. As Jacob Milgram noted, he said this: "The uniqueness of Moses is the sole theme of this chapter. It's reflected in the challenge to his authority in verse 2 and his humility in verse 3, God's affirmation of his uniqueness in verses 6 through 8, the punishment of Miriam, verses 9 through 10, and Moses' successful intercession on her behalf, in verses 11 through 15. All right, verse 1. When they were in Hazeroth, Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses. Now, by listing Miriam first, it is almost certain that the Torah's intent is to inform us that it was Miriam who initiated the complaining against Moses. That she, not Aaron, was punished actually reinforces this point. And this is the only instance in the Torah in which Miriam is depicted acting badly. Aaron, however, was previously shown to have exercised poor judgment in the golden calf episode. So they spoke against Moses because of the Cushite woman he had married. He has married a Cushite woman. So who was Moses' wife? So Cush often refers to Ethiopia. And Cush was a descendant of Ham, who was the son of Noah. See, for example, Genesis 10:6 and Amos 9:7. Where Ethiopia is described by the prophet Amos as just as beloved by God as Israel is. To me, O Israelites, you are just like the Ethiopians. And Cush could also be known today as the country of Sudan in Africa. Or maybe the country Ethiopia. Anyway, but in either case, the Torah is referring to an African country. Now, the verse does not specify Moses' wife's name, so therefore it's unclear whether Miriam and Aaron were speaking about Zipporah, the woman that Moses married while he was in Midian, in Exodus 2, or about maybe a second wife not otherwise mentioned in the Torah. And among the arguments for the woman being a second wife of Moses are these. Number 1, Zipporah was previously identified not as a Cushite but as a Midianite, being the daughter of Jethro, a Midianite priest. 2, Zipporah had been Moses' wife for many years, since before he returned to Egypt to lead the Israelites, and there's no mention of Miriam and Aaron ever objecting to her. 3, there would have been no reason to resent Moses' marrying a Midianite. Midian is where Moses lived for many years after fleeing Egypt, or probably another argument could maybe be made that maybe Moses' wife died, Zipporah, and then maybe he married this other woman, if this other woman is a different woman. But here, those that would argue that the Cushite woman, but however, there are those who actually do argue that the Cushite woman here does actually refer to Zipporah. The most often offered reason is that Midian and Cushan are used interchangeably in the biblical book of Habakkuk. And there's a little footnote number there, so I have to go. Let me see what that note is in the index. I mean, I may not always do this, but sometimes if there is a little number there, I might want to look it up. Okay, but yeah, but the reference is to Habakkuk 3:7, but it doesn't give what it says. Oh well. But Another is the obvious reason. Another is the obvious reason that no other woman was here. It was heretofore mentioned as a wife of Moses, and it seems to me that the arguments in favor of this being Moses' second wife are stronger. But as far as the story is concerned, it does not matter. What matters is that Moses' two siblings gossiped about Moses and his wife. While the Torah does not specify what they gossiped about beyond he married a Cushite woman, there's enough to suggest that it was about her being a non-Hebrew and a black woman or someone of a different culture, and I guess they just weren't happy about it. And I guess as a result, it puts Moses' leadership, I guess, into question. In verse 2, they said, "Has the Lord spoken only through Moses?" That the Torah does not record anything else that Miriam and Aaron said about the Cushite wife may simply just mean that nothing more was said about her. And if that were the case, then they're beginning their complaints against Moses by talking about his wife meant that she was not what actually bothered them. Often when people want to attack somebody, they actually attack anything and everything about the person. And if that is the case here, then then Miriam and Aaron used Moses' non-Israelite wife as a way of getting to what really troubled them, Moses' super status in God's eyes. Yep. It is a human phenomenon in the context of personality clashes, writes Ronald Allen, for one to make present a smokescreen before coming out with the real issue. Yeah, that you might be complaining about something here, but really that's not the main thing. So it just looks like they were just jealous of Moses, being the leader, and now, I guess questioning his character and calling into question, his leadership and, what makes Moses so special. So Miriam and Aaron's resentment of Moses was undoubtedly rooted in his being their sibling, and many brothers and sisters resent a more accomplished sibling, especially a younger one. It's difficult for most people to make peace with their little brother or sister surpassing them in accomplishment or prominence. And we almost assuredly have here another Torah example of sibling rivalry, along with the more extreme cases of Cain and Abel, Jacob and Esau, and Joseph and his brothers. Indeed, there are no siblings in the Torah who are explicitly described as getting along well. That unfortunately appears to be quite common. The Torah doesn't romanticize its characters or its family life. There are no heroes without flaws and no families without problems. Has he not spoken through us as well? So Miriam and Aaron knew from personal experience that just as God could communicate with Moses, he could also communicate with them. For example, here's God's communications with Aaron, Leviticus 10, Numbers 18, and Miriam, Exodus 15, which specifically identifies her as a prophet. Prophecy within families was the ancient norm. As Milgram notes, in the ancient world of the divinatory, I guess, or prophetic, vocation was usually handed down within families. Moreover, Milgram further notes that part of the prophetic revolution within Israel was overthrowing this familial prerogative. And after Moses, prophecy was an individual, not a family group phenomenon. And though Moses was the greatest prophet, well, there would be a greater one that would come after him, Jesus Christ. His sons were not prophets. And you got another essay, I guess, dealing with Miriam and Aaron complaining. So, in analyzing Miriam's and Aaron's statements about Moses, we should distinguish among three expressions of envy, or if one prefers, jealousy, and the two words are used interchangeably. And the name of this essay is called Envy, Resentment, Equality, and Violence. So one type of envy or jealousy is the desire to have the same thing, such as a house, a talent, or an income that someone else has. Yeah, well, this would be coveting. Yeah, don't covet, which is the 10th of the 10 Commandments. It is not necessarily a negative emotion, and it does not need to have negative results, though it can. Wanting to have the same thing another person has can spur a person to work harder. Yeah, or you become covetous, that you'll do anything to get that at any cost, even if you lie, cheat, steal, and murder. Yeah. And for example, wanting a family like that of someone else may actually spur a person to get married and have children. And a second form of envy or jealousy is not merely wanting the same thing another person has, it's actually wanting the very thing that belongs to another person. So here's the coveting. This is not mere envy or jealousy, it's coveting. And in the Exodus Rational Bible, there's, of course, a commentary on do not covet, the 10th of the 10th Commandments, and also Deuteronomy 5 as well. So you can go check out one of those Deuteronomy 5 videos. And in this case, a person does not want a house like his neighbor, like his neighbor's house. He actually wants the neighbor's house. Such envy or jealousy, covetousness, which is actually idolatry, by the way, it frequently leads to evil, specifically stealing, and sometimes adultery and or murder. And the third form of jealousy or envy is the desire to deprive another person of what he or she has, and not necessarily own it, but just to deprive the other person of it. And Miriam and Aaron actually fall into the first category. They wanted what Moses had. They wanted to speak to God. They wanted God to speak to the Israelites through them, just as he did through Moses. And did they fall into the second or the third category of wanting Moses to be deprived of his prophetic powers? In other words, if they could not have what Moses had, did they want to diminish Moses' prophetic abilities? There's no way to know. But it's possible, because they were seeking equality, and it's rarely possible to attain equality, having the same as others, without taking away what others have. And all humans are created in God's image, and all people must be equal before the law, but all other demands for equality, especially equality of result, led to confiscating money into the pursuit of power. Yeah, this would be more of equity, which is having equal outcome, which is ultimately communism. And such equality of, pursuit of power and confiscating money was actually the primary goal of the French Revolution, not the American Revolution. The goal of the American Revolution was liberty. The three great values of the French Revolution are liberty, fraternity, and equality. And the three great values of the American Revolution, as expressed in the American Declaration of Independence, are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And this difference explains why the French Revolution rapidly devolved into wanton violence, whereas the American did not. If you seek equality of result, or equality of outcome, equity, you will inevitably seek to take away what others have in order to achieve it, which would actually be stealing. And material equality is one of the most seductive desires in the human being, and also one of the most dangerous. And since the French Revolution, it has led to more violence than any other belief, including racism. In the 20th century, the bloodiest century on record, more people were murdered, tortured, and deprived of human rights in the name of equality than in the name of anything else. Communism, whose greatest goal was equality, or equity really, resulted in the murder of more than 100 million human beings and the enslavement of over a billion. And this yearning for equality starts with coveting. And this is why the last of the 10 Commandments, the only one of the 10 to prohibit thought, prohibits coveting. And when people covet that which belongs to another, they will often end up murdering and stealing. Well, of course, Jesus says if you lust after somebody, you commit adultery. So that definitely can happen with your thought as well. It's not just coveting. Yeah, well, definitely lusting, having a desire for the sinful thing. I mean, the coveting is when that desire basically is running riot, where you'll do anything to fulfill it, even if you have to add sin on top of sin. And the Bible actually records an episode of coveting that leads to murdering and stealing. Adjacent to the wicked 9th century BC or BCE, King Ahab's winter palace in Jezreel was actually a beautiful vineyard owned by a man named Naboth or Naboth. And Ahab requested Naboth to concede him the land, to give him the land, offering him a choice of money or even a better vineyard. But Naboth refused the king's offer, and the land that had been in his family's hands for a long time, perhaps since the Israelite settlement in Canaan. And he said, of course, the Lord forbid that I should give up to you what I have inherited from my fathers. And Ahab's wife Jezebel, the daughter of a Phoenician king and an idolater, was shocked. Obviously, her father would have just confiscated the land and probably would have killed Naboth. Yeah. But, whenever Ahab comes back to the palace, he's basically throwing a pity party. Like, oh man, I can't believe I didn't get the land. And then Jezebel asks what's wrong. And then she basically says, I'll take care of it. Yeah. Yeah, now it is the time to show yourself as the king of Israel. So she told her husband that she would take care of the matter. She then hired 2 men of low character to testify that Naboth committed a capital crime. He cursed God and the king in the presence of those 2 scoundrels. So that's the lie that's made up in order to have him put to death. And those lowlifes who were working for Jezebel, they testified, and Naboth was stoned to death. And the advantage of this scheme was that while the person who committed a capital crime could not normally bequeath his property to his children, one who committed an act of treason had his property confiscated by the king. And so when Naboth was executed, and Naboth was executed, and Ahab confiscated his field. And then, of course, the prophet Elijah comes and calls him out on that and says judgment is going to fall on your household. But Ahab has like a brief moment of repentance, and so God shows mercy and says that judgment's not going to happen during your lifetime, but it will happen with your son. Yeah, your household is done. Yep, and that ultimately would happen later on in 2 Kings, when God would raise up Jehu to execute judgment on the house of Ahab. And, of course, have Jezebel taken out and the rest of the household. So what started, therefore, with an act of coveting prohibited by the 10th commandment, it led to the violation of the 9th commandment, which outlaws perjury, false witness, and the violation also of the 6th commandment, which outlaws murder, and the violation of the 8th commandment, which outlaws stealing. That is what coveting led to. Miriam's and Aaron's envying, perhaps coveting, what Moses had reveals an additional aspect of the equality problem. It's often those who already have wealth, power, and prestige who most resent those who have more power, wealth, and prestige. Aaron was the high priest, theoretically the holiest man in Israel. Miriam was a prophet, the only woman and the only Israelite other than Moses and Abraham so described in the Torah. And yet these two resented that Moses had an even more intimate relationship with God than they had. So resentment. And resentment, defined by the British writer Douglas Murray, is this: blaming someone else for having something that you believe you deserved more. It's a primary source of evil. It's what led Cain to kill his brother Abel, Joseph's brothers to sell him into slavery, Miriam and Aaron to speak against Moses, and what led Korah's rebellion later in Numbers 16. It has been a major source of Jew hatred, and it's the primary reason for the appeal of communism. And while writing these words, I rose from my chair to pet one of my dogs. Dennis's dog, Otto, an English bulldog, but sadly he died. Upon seeing my pet Otto, my other dog Snoopy, a basset hound, ran over to be petted. Though I had not stopped petting Otto, Otto did everything he could to prevent me from petting Snoopy. The bulldog's joy at being petted was substantially diminished by the basset hound also getting petted. And such resentment is apparently not just restricted to human beings. The Torah labels wicked a person who is upset at seeing another person experiencing joy. And God hears everything we say and sees everything we do. So the Lord heard Miriam and Aaron complaining. So given that Miriam and Aaron were speaking to one another, they rightly assumed that Moses had no idea what they were saying. They forgot or did not want to remember it. But they forgot that the Lord heard it. It's remarkable that many people who claim to believe in God do not live as though God hears everything they say or sees everything that they do. And I have always wondered how people who say that they believe in God deliberately do bad things to other people. Do they think that God is unaware of what they have done? Do they think that God isn't aware? Or they think that God is aware but doesn't care? Or do they think that God will just automatically forgive them? I don't know the answer. I can conclude only that belief in God is often morally meaningless. While people say they believe in God, one should infer nothing either about the God on whom they believe in, or about whether they will generally act decently. Is their God the God of the Bible? Did their God reveal moral demands like the Ten Commandments? Do they believe their God knows all they do and will hold them morally accountable? Yeah, or do they believe that God sent his Son to die for us? And that he rose from the dead? Do they believe their God knows all they do and will hold them accountable? And if the answer to those questions is yes, I presume that they believe in the God of the Torah, and hopefully also New Testament. And we can at least hope that they will generally treat their fellow human beings in accord with his will. And why are we told that Moses is the most humble man on earth, or was? Verse 3. Now the man Moses was a very humble man, more so than any other man on earth. So the Torah describes many moral actions performed by Moses. Actions from which we can infer various noble traits. For example, Moses attacked the Egyptian overseer who beat up an Israelite slave in Exodus 2. That makes clear that Moses hated evil and was prepared to fight against it. The Torah, however, never explicitly states that Moses hated injustice or had the courage to confront it. And later, whenever Moses confronts male shepherds who were bullying a group of female shepherds, in Exodus 2 also, it's clear that Moses was not only courageous, but rejected the widespread view of women as inferior to men. And yet the Torah never describes Moses as courageous or as a defender of women. Only in this verse does the Torah ascribe a virtue to Moses, a very humble man, more so than any other man on earth. Yeah, well, Jesus is the ultimate humble man. Moses is just a shadow. Why this exception? And I think there's two reasons. One, it's to make clear that Miriam's and Aaron's objections to Moses were a product of their own moral defects, not Moses's. And Moses's uniquely exalted place in Israel never went to his head. And the other is to explain why God had to defend Moses. Moses was too humble to defend himself. And here's an essay. Can a humble person consider himself humble? That's an interesting question. And this verse poses two interesting and interrelated questions. And the first question is to traditionalists who believe that Moses wrote the Torah. Would Moses actually write that he was more humble than any other man on earth? Even if one believes that these are God's words, and Moses served as God's stenographer, wouldn't we expect a truly humble man to offer some objection to writing this about himself? And the second question is this. Can a humble person really believe that he's humble? Does thinking, let alone asserting that you're humble, negate being humble? And the Torah's answer to these questions is evidently clear. A humble individual can most assuredly know that he or she is humble. And there are two aspects to humility. One is how a person regards himself, and the other is how that person treats others. Just as a great pianist can recognize he is a great pianist and still be humble, a humble person can recognize he is humble and still be humble. Humility does not demand a person denies that he is humble. Presumably, humble individuals have worked on being humble. So, like the pianist, how can they not be aware of something they have continuously worked on attaining? However, a humble person does not walk around thinking that he's better than others. Yeah, because that would be the opposite of humility. and he certainly does not act as if he does. A humble person knows that as much as he may have worked on being accomplished, ultimately his innate talents come from God or nature. He therefore knows that he has been particularly lucky to achieve what he has achieved, not only thanks to talents he was born with, but thanks to living in a society which enabled him to put his talents to use, thanks to his parents who may have helped him financially and emotionally, and thanks to the fact that he has had the health and the years of his life to achieve what he has achieved. And Rabbi Aaron Isaiah Commensurate, however you say that, known by the title of his most famous book, Chashin Ich. I don't know how to say that. But he's one of the great Jewish religious scholars of the first half of the 20th century. He argued that humility must be rooted in a true, hard-handed assessment of oneself. And he said this: People are mistaken in thinking that humility means to think of oneself as an ignorant boor, even when such is surely not the case. Humility means that a person realizes his true worth. If one is a great Torah scholar, he should know this and conduct himself in a manner consumerate. Consumerate, however you say that, with this true understanding. Anyway. Consumerate. Okay, I guess that's how you say it. Commensurate. There you go, commensurate. But he must not seek honor and glory because of it, for this accomplishment is his purpose in life. And a humble person of accomplishment is also certainly grateful to others for how they have helped him. As George Orwell, while living among hard-working miners, wrote this. Of course, his most famous book is 1984, but he said this: It is brought home to you that only because miners have sweated their guts out that superior persons can remain superior. And therefore watch how people behave towards those below them in social status, and you will likely know whether they are humble. And so, yes, people can know that they are humble, especially if they aspire to be humble, something to which everyone should aspire. And was Moses hurt by what his siblings said? Rabbi and author Jack Reimer has written that Moses learned of his siblings' bad-mouthing of him, and he was probably hurt. Religious leaders, let alone prophets, often do not have personal friends. Clergy, for example, because they're often perceived to be on a higher spiritual plane than lay people, generally have few intimate friends, and this was likely true of Moses. Therefore, finding out that two of the few people Moses may have trusted, his only siblings, bad-mouthed him, finding that out, it must have hurt his feelings. In verse 4, Suddenly the Lord called to Moses, Aaron, and Miriam, and said, Come out, you three, to the tent of meeting. So the three of them went out. And we have a great irony here. Miriam and Aaron were jealous of Moses because God spoke to him directly and often. They now received what they wanted. God spoke to them directly, but only to criticize them. Very interesting. 5. The Lord came down in the pillar of cloud and stopped at the entrance of the tent and called out, Aaron and Miriam. And the two of them came forward, and he said, Hear these my words. When a prophet of the Lord arises among you, I make myself known to him in a vision, and I speak with him in a dream. Not so with my servant Moses. He trusted me throughout my household. With him I speak mouth to mouth, plainly and not in riddles. And he beholds the likeness of the Lord. So God declared the uniqueness of Moses as a prophet. And God is more interested in our behavior than our feelings. Well, although he does care about those too. How then did you not shrink from speaking against my servant Moses? The Lord was incensed with them and departed. So God's rebuke of Aaron and Miriam was direct and unsparing. If God had spoken, as many therapists and teachers and clergy and parents do today, he might have put it to them this way. I understand where you're coming from, that you are suffering feelings of inadequacy owing to the extraordinary status of your younger brother, and I feel your pain. But that's not what God said. As the Torah repeatedly states, God is primarily interested in how we behave rather than how we feel. Although that is important too, especially if it's sinful feelings. And that is precisely what we should be more interested in. Everyone has emotional, psychological, and other reasons for the bad they did. What matters is that they actually did something bad. And when my older son was about 2 years old, he was playing in a park when a boy of about 5 years old went over to him and pushed him to the ground, hurting him and causing him to cry. And the 5-year-old's mother ran over to the boy and embraced him and asked him lovingly, "Honey, what's troubling you?" Yep. And that mother was the product of an age that put feelings above behavior. God doesn't. And this is one of the most important messages of the Torah. Verse 10. As the cloud withdrew from the tent, there Miriam was stricken with snow-white scales. And when Aaron turned around toward Miriam, he saw that she was stricken with scales. And though many translations translate the Hebrew tazarat, however you say that, as leprosy, the translation snow-white scales is actually more accurate. And modern scholars actually widely agree that tazarat was not leprosy. And Leviticus 13 describes the same disease. And the Torah states that people afflicted with it were often cured, though no cures were available for leprosy in the ancient world. Yeah. So maybe this wasn't actually leprosy, but maybe it just looked like it. Alright. Especially because she gets healed pretty quickly. Yeah, in like 7 days. Yeah, well, Moses will pray for her, but anyway. And verse 11, and Aaron said to Moses, O my Lord, account not to us the sin which we've committed in our folly. So after God's rebuke and witnessing Miriam's punishment, Aaron offered he referred to his younger brother as my Lord. And that had to be difficult. And the only other instance in which Aaron addressed Moses as my Lord was in the aftermath of the golden calf incident. And Richard Elliott Friedman, in his commentary on the Torah, said this: on each of the 2 occasions on which he had acted inappropriately, he has ended up having to acknowledge Moses' status humbly and politely. And Aaron continues, verse 12, let her not be as one dead who emerges from her mother's womb with half his flesh eaten away. And Milgram says this: when a fetus that has died in the womb is delivered, its skin flakes off, giving the appearance of a leper. So having just claimed that he and Miriam were equal to Moses, Aaron now has to beg Moses to intercede with God on Miriam's behalf. And Milgram comments, Moses' intercession has ironic implications. Only he whom Miriam and Aaron had wronged, Moses can help him. And this motif occurs elsewhere. King Abimelech is told that only Abraham, whose wife he has taken, can remove the plague in Genesis 20. And the friends who wronged Job by accusing him of being responsible for his suffering must turn to him for their expiation. Job 42. And of course, we wronged Jesus by sinning against God. Yep. And it was our sin that put him on the cross. But yet he's the only one that can save us. Verse 13, and so Moses cried out to the Lord, saying, O God, please heal her. Two scholars can read the same verse and understand it quite differently. Rabbi Joseph Hertz views Moses' 5-word prayer as a beautiful and simple model of liturgical brevity, while Professor Jacob Milgram criticizes Moses for his tears and what he regards as unenthusiastic prayer on behalf of his sister. And Milgram points out that Moses spoke entirely in monosyllables and did not even mention Miriam's name, whereas Moses pleaded with God on behalf of the Israelites after the golden calf incident. He offered a lengthy, poetic, and impassioned plea. So the literal and more accurate translation of Moses' prayer is this: God, please heal her, please. And when properly translated, it seems that Hertz's view of the prayer appears to be a stronger one, and it's actually more of a beautiful and just simple prayer, rather than being unenthusiastic. But the Lord said to Moses, if her father spat in her face, would she not bear her shame for 7 days? Let her be shut out of the camp for 7 days, and then let her be readmitted. So the spitting reference here is to a cultural and not a biblical practice of the time. And Gordon Wenham explains this analogy this way: her affront to Moses' spiritual authority is as gross as if her own father had spit her in the face, had spat in her face. And David L. Scruggs writes this: since spitting in one's face is an act of shaming, the statement suggests that Miriam is being publicly disgraced and excluded due to the norms of shame, and just for a week. And this is how the Talmud explains God's statement. Of course, another text that the Jews like to use. And here's what it says. Then the Holy Blessed One said to Moses, if the king had reprimanded her, or if her father had reprimanded her, it would have been appropriate for her to sit in shame for 7 days. And since it is I, the King of all kings, all the more so it is just for her to sit in shame for 14 days. However, for your sake I will forgive her. She will be shamed for only 7 days. I may look at the little footnote on that just to see. Yeah. When was that one? Yeah, there it is. Yeah, when it comes from the part of the Talmud that is called Avat de Rabbi Natan 9, chapter 9, verse 2. So, anyway, but I don't view the Talmud as scripture. Yeah. Alright, and then verse 15. So Miriam was shut out of the camp 7 days, and the people did not march on until Miriam was readmitted. So the Israelites delayed their journey until Miriam was readmitted to the camp. And this was likely a sign of respect for Miriam, given that she was Moses' sister and that she had led the Israelite women in a song after the Israelites crossed the Red Sea in Exodus 15, and of course that she was a prophet. And verse 16. After that, the people set out from Hazeroth and encamped in the wilderness of Paran. Yep, and while there, Moses will send out the 10 spies to go check out the land of Canaan, but that's coming up in chapter 13, and Lord willing, I'll get to that another time. But until then, may God bless you and the grace and mercy won by Jesus, the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with you all.